Hello everyone, this is Code Ode. Welcome back. Today I want to talk about the observer design pattern and how to use this in Laravel. So the observer pattern is a behavioral design pattern where an object, called the subject, maintains a list of dependents, called the observers, and notifies them automatically of any state change. First of all, what does it mean behavioral design pattern? Well, it means that it deals with how objects communicate and interact with each other. Now, regarding this design pattern, the observer, let's think about a real life situation. So, we often find ourselves in situations in code where we have a certain action happening, and for that action, we have side effects. For example, you may have a user registration system, and the side effects to this action may be sending a confirmation email, logging, sending a notification, and so on and so forth. In this case, the subject is the user, and the dependents or the side effects are the observers. Well, using this design pattern, we can decouple the subject, the user, from its side effects, the observers. You've probably been using this design pattern in Laravel with events and listeners. You can define your own custom event, and for that event, you can define your own custom list of listeners. So whenever that event is triggered in code, those listeners will fire up and do their work. And with model observers, you can basically define an observer for each CRUD operation regarding your models. So now that we have learned about this design pattern, let's see a real life example in Laravel. We will not be using events, listeners, model observers, and so on. We'll actually create this from scratch. So I have created a Laravel 12 application, and I think I'm using the latest version of PHP, which is 8.4.0. And for this Laravel application, I'm using Pest for testing instead of PHP unit. In your routes, make sure you have this API.php with this route. So post route to that register, and I'm using this register controller. Also make sure in your Bootstrap app.php you have this configuration for the API in order to load the API file. Now let's go to app, HTTP controllers, and let's check this register control.php. We are injecting this registration service in the constructor. Then we have an invocable method. We do some validation, and then we call this register method from this service, which in turn returns the user. Eventually, we return a JSON response. So basically, this is a simple API application for user registration. So let's check this service. So services, registration service.php is pretty simple. The user is going to be the subject, and then we have some side effects, the observance. We do some logging, and then we set this welcome email. So let's check this email, which is pretty simple. That is the email. You can simply create it with artisan command. So let's go back to this. The user is going to be the subject, and we have the side effects, which are the observance. And we want to refactor this using the observer design pattern. Nice. But before doing that, let's check tests, feature, and register control test.php because I have this test. So I'm spying on log and fake the email so that we can make sure they are working. And this is a simple test. So if we run PHP artisan test, you can see that the test is passing, right? So we can test our very simple application. So what we need to do now is basically refactor this to use the observer design pattern. So what we need to do is basically decouple the subject from its observers from these side effects, logging and sending that welcome email. We can make our own code for the observer design pattern, or we can go with the standard approach and using SPL, which stands for standard PHP library. So let's do that. Implements SPL subject. So this interface is coming from PHP. You can see that PHP is providing some interfaces for us, some standard approach from defining the subject and the observer. But for now, we will implement the subject. So we need to create some three methods. Public function attach is going to take an SPL observer. This is another interface coming from that PHP, from that standard PHP library. So observer, This is going to return void. So nobody for now. Public function detach. It's going to take the SPL observer like this, observer, and it's going to return void and nobody for now. And then public function notify, which is basically it takes no parameters and is basically going to call all the observers. Nice. So we are working with observers, which means we want to store them somewhere. Let's create a property. So private array observers like this, and by default we set this to an empty array. So let's start with the first one. This is pretty simple. This observers like this. So we want to add a new element into this observers array, which is the observer. Nice. Let's do the same for detaching. So this observers is going to be equal with array filter. The first argument is the array that we want to filter. So this observers, and then a callback function that's going to loop through each element and filter those elements. And I want to use the shortcut syntax for defining this function, which is going to be fn like this. So we need the current observer that's being looped. And I want to basically keep all those observers except the one that we want to detach, which is going to look like this. Nice. Now let's implement this notify method, which is pretty simple. For each is observers as observer like this. We want to basically say observer update, and then we pass this, which is the current object. So each of our own observers is going to have this update method, which is coming from this SPL observer. And I'm passing this. That is because we need to basically pass the user, right? The logging needs the user, and this welcome email also needs the user, which means we have to go to the top and define the user. So private optional user, because it may be no by default, right? So we set it no by default, and we can create a helper method, which is going to be public function get user like this, return this user. Nice. And we can go here up to the side effects comment and simply say this notify. So we are creating the user, and then we are notifying all the observers, right? So this should be notified. The next thing that we need to do is basically refactor this into their own classes to basically have them as proper observers, right? So let's create these two observers that we need. But before doing that, make sure you have this SPL observer interface imported. And you can see it right here. Nice. So let's start with the first one. Load user creation.php. So PHP namespace app services class load user creation implements SPL observer like this. So make sure you import this interface, and we need to define that public function update, which is going to take SPL subject. So the subject, and it's going to return void like this. Nice. So make sure to import this too. And we can create a second one just to have it here for now. This is going to be send welcome email like this. So make sure to copy the name and replace this right here. So let's go to the first one. We have the subject. We know we have this get user method. So we can go right here and say user is going to be this, not this, but subject get user. Nice. So let's go back to this registration service. We need to change this to be this user. And right here, we want to return this user. And let's take this logging from here. Nice. So let's paste it here. Make sure to import this log facade. Nice. Now we need to do the same for this send welcome email observer. So we get the user. We take this code from here. and we paste it here. Nice. Make sure to import this mail facade and this welcome mail class. So once again, nice. So let's go back to our registration service. And right now we can simply say this notify, which is going to call all those observers. Nice. But there's one more thing that we need to do is basically we need to attach the observers, right? So let's go to our providers, app service provider. And this is going to be this app bind, and we need to bind for that registration service. And then we need to pass a callback function, which is going to take the app. And we need to say service. This is going to be new registration service. So we are working with Laravel container service. And then we simply say service attach. This is going to be new log user creation. So service attach new send welcome email like this. And then we return the service. So every time we are going to inject this registration service class, it's going to return this service object. So make sure to import everything. This two, and this one too. Nice. So I think we are done. We're calling this notify. We have those two observers. This one is doing the logging, and this one is sending the welcome email. So let's test our code. So PHP artisan test. And you can see that the test is passing. And we have successfully implemented the observer design pattern in Laravel. Now there's one more thing that we can do, a small refactor. Imagine that you have multiple observers, and in each one of them you have to define these methods, right? So we can go with a better approach and create a PHP trait. So traits, create a new folder in app, traits, and this is going to be called SPL subject trait.php like this. So namespace app traits. So trait like this, SPL subject trait like this. And what we need to do first is take this property and move it here. Nice. Now we can take these three methods and put them down here. Make sure to properly format this and make sure to import the SPL observe. Now let's go back to the service class and simply say use SPL subject trait like this and make sure to import it. Nice. Let's go back to the terminal, PHP artisan test to make sure the tests are still passing, and you can see the test is still passing. If you enjoyed this and if you find this useful, please like and subscribe, and see you next time with more exciting stuff.